Welcome to BizWire. I'm Joseph Nordstrom in Beijing. When U.S. President Barack Obama finishes his African tour today, it will mark the end of what some international development experts say is an attempt to counter China's growing economic influence throughout sub-Saharan Africa. In his biggest announcement of the trip, Obama pledged $7 billion over the next 5 years for power projects in sub-Saharan Africa, where only 1 in 4 people have access to electricity. But Obama's proposal, which aims to partner U.S. government financing with private sector investment, may look low wattage compared with China's already ongoing big electricity projects on the continent. Beijing has been lighting the way in Africa with billions of dollars of power investment and projects. As with other infrastructure development opportunities in Africa, Washington seems to be arriving late to the party. China has already spent or committed billions to electrify Africa by building dams and power plants in a number of countries. Visiting Africa in March, China's President Xi Jinping renewed an offer of $20 billion in loans to, quote, help African countries turn resource endowment into development strength. Longtime expert on China in Africa, Deborah Brodingham, said that China is not doing this to counter the U.S. They're doing it because it fits into their vision of themselves as a major player. She says China does need African resources, but more so they need African support and diplomatic partnerships. Brodingham says China's push to secure trade relationships within Africa is an extension of a foreign policy focused on continued growth with partners throughout the world. Brodingham says there is room for both the U.S. and China to do business in Africa, and the conflict between them there is overblown. Writer and analyst Richard Popluk said what the Chinese did that no one else had done before was that they considered Africa as a market for Chinese goods, institutions, and services, when the rest of the world viewed Africa as an economic basket case and a place for aid programs. Popluk says many African policymakers are just not interested in hearing about the power of the free market anymore and are interested in China's model of development, which some call the Beijing Consensus. Last decade, Chinese firms began shoring up major contracts throughout the continent that ensured access to Africa's vast resource wealth in exchange for the funding and construction of infrastructure projects like roads, railways, and airports. Since 2002, China has invested an estimated $75 billion on the continent, hot on the heels of the United States, which invested $90 billion during the same period. The U.S. might still hold the edge over China on investment, but the Chinese replaced the U.S. as Africa's biggest trade partner in 2009. Sino-African trade is now estimated to be $200 billion a year and is expected to rise to $325 billion in the next 2 years. This strengthening relationship is principally fueled by China's need for energy resources to fuel its own growth, but resource extraction is not Beijing's only goal. Africa has great potential as a consumer market, something China could help to develop with smart investments across a range of sectors. There are complaints, however, from some government and business circles in Africa that Chinese companies often bring in their own workforces to develop resource-related infrastructure projects, creating few new jobs, let alone value-adding processes or manufacturing industries. African leaders, though, insist that China negotiates on a level playing field since African countries are able to set the agenda. Ethiopia's Foreign Minister Adhanom said the onus lies on African countries and not on China to ensure they are not taken advantage of. Obama, speaking in South Africa on Saturday, made a thinly veiled dig at China's activities in Africa. He urged African leaders to be tougher negotiators with foreign investors so that ordinary people would benefit and spur broad-based development. But analysts working in the region say much of the criticism and media attention of China's moves in Africa is often misleading and even wrong. Greg Mills from the Brent Hearst Foundation in Johannesburg says China has helped to open up the world's eyes to the potential in Africa. Mills says life on the continent has improved because of Chinese interest and improved political conditions in many countries. Despite some skepticism of China's intentions, for many Africans, not having seen new roads, dams, or hospitals built for decades, this new focus on infrastructure development is what really counts. You're watching BizWire on the Blue Ocean Network. Stay tuned for more in Economic Insight.